Trial by Stone, the Dark Crystal podcast, is brought to you by Dream Fasting, the Dark Crystal Experience, the Facebook group on the Dark Crystal by fans for fans. To join the group, search on Facebook for Dream Fasting, the Dark Crystal Experience.
Another world, another time, in the age of wonder.
You are listening to
Trial by Stone.
Trial by Stone!
Trial by Stone!
This is what I came for.
Your vital essence, the Dark Crystal.
I can feel something. Hear it almost.
Don't move.
Don't move? Where would I go?
Quiet!
Here's your host, Phillip Mitchell. Hello and welcome to Trial by Stone. This is your vital essence on all things Dark Crystal. I'm your host, Phillip Mitchell. Just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. And on this episode, we got a special guest for this show episode of Trial by Stone, Ty, and she makes YouTube videos. So her YouTube channel is called Wit and Folly. And why I got her on the show is recently, Ty does a lot of videos about Star Wars, more, of course, to do with the sequel trilogy and some of the themes that sort of been playing, with that trilogy in particular, but also the reason I have Ty on the show is she recently did a video, sort of the connections between, the title's called the Star Wars Dark Crystal Conspiracy, and the video was sort of the connections between the two sort of franchises, Star Wars and the Dark Crystal. And of course, for me as a fan, this is something I've sort of, I have seen a couple of these online, some connections here and there. But what I loved about this video was just it was a really more in-depth sort of comparisons between the two franchises with Star Wars and Dark Crystal. So first of all, I just want to say, Ty, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, really, really excited to be here. I was really excited to find out that there's a community of people who love the Dark Crystal. It seems like such an obscure thing to me.
Yeah, it is. It is a very small, community at the moment. Especially there are a couple of Dark Crystal, on Facebook. There's a couple of the fan groups out there. One in particular that I'm involved in is Dream Fasting, the Dark Crystal Experience, and it's just such an amazing group that I always, I'm always on it, looking at it every day. There's always someone posting something about Dark Crystal, whether it's behind the scenes or just photos from the film, or actual discussions on, whether it's like on the comic books or on new material. So it's been really fun. Yeah,
I love it. When I have to admit, I wasn't like a big fan of the Dark Crystal until I started seeing the parallels, and then I found out when I started looking more into it that there were comics, and I knew there was a book. I knew they made a book called the
Creation Myths.
Yeah, and when I started reading the comics, I was like, wow, this is cool. There's just something about franchises that don't have source material. I think either Dark Crystal, everything that we have now is based on the movie, and it's the same thing as Star Wars. Everything that we have with Star Wars is based on the first film. So when I found out there was more material out there, and the fact that they're creating another show, I dived in head first. super obsessed with it now.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a lot. That's probably going to happen with once Age of Resistance comes out. Once people sort of discover about the show, and then they're like, oh, it's actually based on a movie. I'll check the movie out, and it's like, oh wow, there's all this comics and all these books and all this other material that's been out. So it's next year it's just going to be a very exciting time. Not only for Dark Crystal with Age of Resistance, but of course with Star Wars as well, with Episode 9 is concluding the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
So which is really really exciting. So I guess I would like to know how did you discover the Dark Crystal for the first time? Was it sort of recently, or you sort of knew about it a while ago but just sort of came back to it?
Yeah, I loved Labyrinth when I was younger, but I think that's That's normal, especially as a woman, you know. But yeah, I knew about the Dark Crystal. I'd seen the Dark Crystal. I kind of recently with the Last Jedi have come into this weird resurgence of loving media and loving film and loving the weird, and because I saw something in the Last Jedi that I hadn't seen with any other Star Wars film, which was myth, like real myth. And when I started going into it and I was like, hey, I've always been interested in this stuff, let's start like actually looking at these parallels that I've always been thinking of. I've just never found a platform to discuss them on. And you know, that's when I kind of rediscovered the Dark Crystal. And you know, it's not just about obviously the story parallels, but also the creators and how they relate to each other, how they've worked on each other's works. And to me, that is so much bigger. You know, I think George Lucas was on Labyrinth, and obviously Frank Oz, you know, with Yoda and with Star Wars. It's really cool. It's really cool that, like, it's very obvious that they shared the message that they wanted to get across. So that's kind of more, that's like what I latched onto, I think. And that's really what got me into the Dark Crystal and got me into like more of the material, like the books and the comics.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like these two franchises, they're actually, yeah, very deeply connected. That really all started with Empire Strikes Back, with the creation of Yoda, and also with Frank Oz puppeteering and doing the voice of Yoda. And I think if Yoda didn't work, I don't know how if the Dark Crystal would have worked. I think, I mean, even though they were making the film around the same time, but really I think, yeah, Yoda was sort of proof that if audiences can believe that Yoda's real, then, you know, you can make a whole world full, you know, almost full of Yodas, you know. I guess with the Mystics, for example, the sort of, you know, the old wizardry kind of, you know, dinosaurs in a way, you know, that they've been like that for 1,000 of years. And yeah, I mean, there's always, been that like connections to it. I mean, it wasn't even until a couple of years ago when I sort of really got back into the Dark Crystal that I sort of thought about, I mean, especially with when the Master sort of passed away, just how similar that was to Yoda in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Which I really like that. Yeah. Even though they were like both shot like probably around the same time, I think it was just just a pure coincidence on, you know, on that approach. And that's the thing. It's sort of like, it started with Empire, then Empire to Dark Crystal, and then, you know, with all the magic that happened in the Dark Crystal, I mean, that sort of got applied really with Return of the Jedi with with Jabba's palace, because a lot of the puppeteers that worked on Dark Crystal worked on Return of the Jedi. So
yeah, apparently
I love the synergy. Yeah,
I just read somewhere recently that there's a ton of puppeteers in that one scene with Jabba. Like I didn't realize how many people it took to make that work, and that's impressive. And I always liked that, like the practical effects stuff. I love that stuff, and I wish that the puppeteering thing didn't die out when it did. It's kind of sad. And the fact that they're gonna do this show in practical is crazy. It's astounding to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean that was always been like when we heard the announcement about Age of Resistance. I know a lot of fans were sort of concerned about how much sort of CGI that there's going to be, and it seems like I mean, on the press release, it did say that it's going to be all live action, so puppetry, that sort of thing. And I would only think that if there were going to be CGI, it'd be all, you know, for minor enhancements or like basically what would replace some matte paintings back in those days. Which is really cool. And so I guess, you know, with the Dark Crystal, do you sort of have a favorite like scene, you know, from the film?
Goodness gracious. It's so weird because when I was little, I loved not little. I don't know what age I was when I first saw it, but I definitely was old enough to appreciate the love story. And I love like Kira. Everything Kira does, everything she says is just like, you know, she's amazing. But I think the scene that I love the most is probably the silliest scene that most people remember. It's the Striders. I know that sounds so weird, but like I thought that was the coolest thing. I thought it's fascinating. Every time it's on, I'm like really close to the screen, like just trying to figure out how they did it. And I haven't seen a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. I've seen very little of behind the scenes because I'm almost at this point kind of afraid that it'll kind of take away the magic. And I haven't like seen it that many times, so I want to see it like 20 more times before I start really digging into to how they did it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I know they did a they did a documentary, I think, called The World of the Dark Crystal. And I think it is on the Blu-ray or on the Blu-ray releases of it. So I mean, it is definitely worth checking out. Like when you get a chance to watch it, to like 20 or so more times. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. But yeah, there's this. Yeah, it's just incredible. That's just a film. Just the amount of work that was put into it, and just there's no humans, and it's just all puppetry magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a one of a kind film. Yeah.
It really is. Like even its closest, a Labyrinth is not anything like the Dark Crystal. I thought I related them together a lot more before I really sat down and watched it, this time around. This time around I was like, whoa, this is totally different. This is grander consequences. This is bigger than anything that Labyrinth ever was, and I love it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and I really enjoy Labyrinth as well. I sort of actually watched it recently on the 4K release
Nice.
of Labyrinth, and the one thing I didn't really notice, I think it must be because of the added detail, but there was so much glitter on the sets. I don't know, is that something?
I noticed that too.
Just yeah.
I watched it recently too, and I was like, good Lord, this movie was, if it wasn't like explicitly for, little girls when it came out, I mean, it definitely seems like it was, but I don't know my history and my behind the scenes history as much. But yeah, I definitely saw that glitter.
Yeah, no, me too. Yeah, but I mean, it's still a fun film. With Labyrinth, I enjoyed it as well. Just sort of the adventure that they have, and it does have its sort of 80s cheesiness here and there, but it's sort of, I mean, that's sort of part of, the legacy of the film. Just that, back then. So which is all cool. Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah. So I guess I mean the big thing I want to chat about is because you recently did the video about the Dark Crystal Star Wars conspiracy, and I really enjoyed it. So I just want to say thank you for making that video. I had a lot of fun watching it, and
Oh, I'm glad.
yeah
Yeah.
and because I mean that's the thing, like what was your overall thoughts, like, I mean, with the Last Jedi, and sort of how you sort of came across with having the connections between the Last Jedi and the Dark Crystal?
Well, there's a lot, so I'm gonna try to like not go too deep into it. But the big thing that is happening right now, I think, in like Star Wars fandom is obviously there's the divide amongst fans of whether they like it or not, hate it or love it. But then there's also the divide of whether or not Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, deserves like redemption, or whether or not there's a love story happening between him and Rey. And I walked out of the movie thinking, oh, that's a relationship. Like the hand touching scene in the hut, I was like, oh, that's romantic. Like there's no coming back from that. That is the love story in these movies. So when I got into the fan base after seeing the movie, I was shocked at how many people were so they say anti that relationship, and that's bizarre to me because Star Wars is about love, it's about family, it's about growing up, and to not want that to happen seems really bizarre to me, especially if you're like a fan. But when I, got involved with the fandom, which, it's I feel like I'm all new. I'm like new to this, but yet I'm there like every day, so not like an expert, but I know what's going on. So trying to find parallels to me and trying to find like literary parallels or like parallels in similar media is the best way to show people that this can work. Not that I'm trying to prove it to anyone, like I'm not really, but I think it's really important that people see that it works. You know, if they just casually I don't try to make like an argument for the relationship in my video at all. I just, you know, I kind of hint at it, like these two media are about the same thing. You know, they're about coming together, they're about finding your family as well as other things. so yeah, I don't know, like I don't know where you are in that area. I know you have fond feelings of the new Star Wars films. I listened to a couple of episodes, so
Oh yeah. I think especially my recent episode with Jason, with Jason on the show, who he also has his own sort of YouTube channel called the Dark Crystal Conjunction, and I think every week he makes a video about the Dark Crystal, and at the moment he's been going into the lore aspect, which has been really cool and very exciting. And yeah, we sort of chatted to Star Wars quite a bit, and I mean I don't mind because chatting Star Wars on a Dark Crystal podcast, because they're both very connected, even though they're not like connected as they're not like two franchises combined into one franchise together sort of thing, but they're connected enough that there are connections between the two in general that I feel like it's open game, and I don't mind. So, but yeah, I mean like with The Last Jedi, like I really enjoyed it. Like I didn't mind the film. Like I mean, I know people that had that I know a lot of fans or people that had problems with the way Luke was portrayed,
Yeah.
and just how different he was, and sort of how he sort of had this split second decision of almost being bad to the thought of killing Ben would solve the problems, and but then he had that split second decision and sort of thought, no, that's I can't do that. I know a lot of fans sort of had like problems with that, but I didn't mind that, because it's just like with considering that it took place 30 years after Return of the Jedi, he's not the same Luke. Like he's a different he's a different person, and especially more different in the 5 years in that before The Last Jedi.
oh yeah.
So yeah, and like I mean for me, like the only thing I probably dislike is more probably just the chase between the Resistance and the First Order. I don't know. Like I think I just didn't like it just because I think because I think we've seen that before in other films like Empire Strikes Back. So I just felt like it wasn't adding anything new. But I will say that if we didn't have that, then we would not have had the Holdo maneuver. Or had been introduced to Holdo, which I loved her as a character, and I was so devastated about her sacrifice.
Right.
But it was a good sacrifice that she did.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of I'm up and down, but overall I still enjoy it. But I will say that it is a film that even after seeing it the first screening, I was thinking about the film for almost a good month, every day. I was just thinking about that film.
Me too. It really, really stuck with me. And it was so funny because the last couple of years I've been flirting with this idea of doing a YouTube channel. And when I came out of that movie, I think I just made a YouTube video just to kind of experiment about Anne with an E, which is another great show that I adore. And it was a safe subject. And I was flirting around with that, and I got out Last Jedi. I'm like, oh my Lord, this is what I got to do now. Like, I'm gonna be making YouTube videos, and not just about Star Wars. All of that media that is trying to teach us something and trying to push you somewhere. That's really cool. That's something I want to make sure that I focus on. And I will eventually try to get out of the Star Wars stuff. And once, Resistance comes out, I want to do some stuff on that. And, new shows are going to come out that I really want to do videos on. So right now it's, yeah, like you said, like Star Wars, somehow Last Jedi just sticks with you.
Yeah, it really did for me. Yeah, like even like just thinking about it for a good month or two. Just I know, just thinking of different things, and
Yeah.
I know people think, oh, because the thing with the film is like I love Ray so much more. I love her more than than Poe and Finn. I know people were like, oh, Poe and Finn, they weren't, they didn't do the right thing. But I mean, for me, I'm just like, well, people make mistakes, even in real life. So
Yeah,
so it's like, thinking about relating to those things, I'm like, oh, well, that I don't mind that.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to dislike or like characters,
Yeah, that's why there's so many. We have so
exactly,
many characters in the Star Wars movies to like or to not like or whatever. Like, I wasn't a fan of Luke when I was younger because I didn't relate to him at all.
Yeah.
But I love Rey and it's a little, it's definitely because I'm a girl. Like, I can't help it. I relate to Rey, but
yeah, absolutely.
that's the point.
And that's cool. Like, yeah, with characters, it's just more just about the story. As long as the story is great,
Yeah.
that's all I really care about, like more than anything.
I know.
Yeah,
And that's, I think,
so
what a lot of people are kind of on the fence about, which is, where is this going? And, again, it's that one side versus the other side. One side wants Kylo Ren to be a really good three-dimensional bad guy. And they want him, and then therefore he has to die at the end. That's, to me, not satisfying. It's satisfying to them, though, and I can't wrap my head around it, but that's what one side wants, and the other side wants, him to be redeemed, and hopefully to have, like, a relationship with Rey, or, I have my other ideas about it. There's a lot of ways I think it could go, which I think would be awesome, but obviously the things that have to happen are that they gotta balance the Force, that's, and if you want to get that back to Dark Crystal, that's the cool parallel that I wanted to focus on with that, which was, something happened a long time ago that broke things. It broke something. And we don't have a lot of that lore told to us in Star Wars. Like, it's not played out yet. We don't know a lot. Like, I think I pulled, like, one comic that I could find them mention the 100-Year Darkness. And I think it's in another book, but I didn't have enough time to pull it.
Yeah, it was. I think it was from the Star Wars, like the new canon comics.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, because it's.
So no, that was kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's in Legends. It's the decanonized expanded universe, but they're not going to do this exact same thing. We know that they're going to borrow ideas. So there's only so much we can go off on, because they never balanced the Force in Legends either. So it's a question of, we know that Rey and Ben are on two sides of the Force, or not two sides of the Force. They're two different Force users. But we know that, like, Ben's not totally dark. So can they balance the Force? Is that something they can do? Like, how are they going to do it? That's all stuff that I like speculating about. I'm not going to, like, hang my hat on one theory, because I think that's where you get disappointed.
Yes, yeah. But just if you think about this theory for so many years and it just doesn't go that way, and it's like, oh.
Yeah, that's why people were disappointed about Luke.
But it's fun. Yeah.
So, but yeah, so I definitely, like I said, there's things that I want to happen. I won't be disappointed if they don't happen, but I definitely think that the parallels are super important. Like, Rian Johnson said that one of his favorite movies was Dark Crystal, like, several times in interviews and stuff. Not that, I don't know. This is why it's a conspiracy, right? Because it feels kind of silly. Like we're reading too far into it or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I see it. I don't know. Go ahead.
I was just saying, it's just fun just to think of those things anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though I know, like you mentioned about, like, it's like to a point, it's like you could almost believe that the world of Dark Crystal, could easily be connected to Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like if you had your own head canon that, that Thra was in the outer rim.
Right.
I would think, that yeah, you know
It
that
fits.
that could happen. I mean, even though it's something that won't ever happen,
Yeah.
but it's kind of cool to think about. But I mean, especially like the connections. I mean, with more so the Last Jedi, especially like when you had the hand touching, that's sort of almost like the equivalent
Yeah.
of dream fasting, and I mean, going into detail about how Rey's original name was going to be Kira.
Yeah.
Or look a bit further, that Ben, rhymes with Jen.
Simple stuff. Yeah, really simple stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if, a lot of the people in the story group hadn't seen the Dark Crystal and didn't get inspired by it. A lot of the, that's how they make the stories. They sit down in a group and they talk about it, and they talk about, okay, what are we going to do with the comics? What are we going to do about the books? Where are we going to interweave these themes in? Because it's all about, themes of family and love and being kind of the best you can be and growing up, and, how are we going to tell these stories? And that collaborative storytelling gets you these really, like, that's why it's related to Dark Crystal, like, because again, there's no source material. They're sitting around a table coming up with new things all the time. So that's, to me, like, that's how they had to figure out Dark Crystal. And that's, in the episode where you talked to the guy who did the Power of the Dark Crystal comic.
Oh yeah, Phillip Kennedy Johnson.
Yeah. And you guys were kind of talking about how you're piecing together, what I think Jim Henson came up with, even though it didn't really work in any kind of, it wasn't like a rule book, but it's canon, so you have to make it work.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's so Star Wars. Like, I think George Lucas wrote in, General Grievous said that to Anakin, like, I thought you'd be taller, or something like that, something about his height. And so
yeah, because they never met each other. Like,
Yeah.
that was the first time that they met each other in episode 3, and then which became a big problem, I know, with Dave Filoni, like when they were doing the Clone Wars,
Yeah.
is because they did like 6 seasons, if you count the lost missions, of stories, to do with General Grievous, and with the Separatists and the Republic, and it's like, well, how do you make episodes where you don't have Anakin and Grievous ever meet each other? And I think there was one time that they did do that, but it was like they were both kind of knocked out. I think it was like when they were on Naboo, and they had some that trade thing between Grievous and Anakin.
I don't remember that one. That's too funny.
Oh, yeah, it was something like that. Yeah. I just vaguely remember that. I remember it was something to do with Naboo.
Mm-hmm.
They went to Naboo, and I think Anakin was captured by Dooku,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a time where I think the Republic had Grievous, like they actually got him,
Yeah.
but because they got Anakin, and of course Padme being there, and she's like, we need to get Anakin back, and so they decide to make a deal to
Right.
give Anakin back, and they give him give
Grievous
them
back,
a Grievous.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so creative, I guess. It's so funny to me.
And it was
like all of this.
and it was like,
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, I was just gonna say, and that's when like Anakin at the time was knocked out,
Mm-hmm.
like unconscious, and I think Grievous was as well, kinda, I think. So yeah, it was a weird,
Okay. It's so funny. That it kind of makes me think about, people get really upset about obviously people got upset about in the Dark Crystal, like how those rules didn't work together, and people also got upset about how the new trilogy doesn't track perfectly. Like the Force Awakens doesn't really align with The Last Jedi in a lot of different ways, apparently, is what they're saying. I don't see it that way. But what's cool to me about doing movies and material like this is that different creators can put their signature on it. And that was George Lucas's original idea with Star Wars. Like, that's what he wanted to do before he kind of backtracked on that, because The Empire Strikes Back did not go the way he really wanted it to go. So he kind of changed his mind. He dug it in his feet a bit more. Then he did the prequels later, and he, but originally he wanted there to be a bunch of different directors that are telling the story of the Skywalker family, and that's how they revived it. And now they have the story group that helps keep everything synced up so that nothing is really messy or nothing's really, doesn't connect. And that's so cool to me. Like, I don't want one person telling me a bunch of stories from a huge universe. I want to make sure that there's representation there, different people telling different stories in the same world, but understanding like the basics, like the basic message to get across. I think that is so cool. And it's, again, like the Dark Crystal, like these people have to fit their comics and their stories in back to that one movie that wasn't really that well thought out.
No, I mean, because the thing. Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Dark Crystal is that with creating the film, that it was really just for Jim. It was always about just building the world first, and then the story sort of came second.
Yeah.
To him, so
and that's like George Lucas was very into the technology that he could use, the new things that he could do, and a lot of the aesthetic was really important to him. But the story, again, it fell into place as he kind of figured it out.
Yeah, and I guess with George, like, I mean, if he really had like the whole game plan like for the original trilogy, then like, I mean, he would not have had Luke and like Leia kissing Luke in episode 5 and in Hoth, which sort of oh
yeah there's so many things that happened in the original trilogy that people love that probably would never have happened if he would have thought it out, if he had planned the whole thing out. Like Darth Vader would not have been such a badass as soon as you meet him if he eventually was going to be Luke's dad. Like, I think he would have planned more of like a redemption arc for him. He wouldn't have had him like chasing down Luke. He would probably had him figure out that it's his son earlier on or whatever. Like, things would have gone so differently.
Yeah, and I think like because I mean originally, I mean he he had plans to do like 9 or 12 episodes, so it's like Darth Vader was going to be around for quite a while, but I think because by the time of Empire and I think George just wanted to sort of wrap up the trilogy, so there was a lot of things that sort of got really wrapped up in a neat little package in a way. But I mean that would have been interesting had Star Wars continued on through the 80s and even the 90s, like 7, 8, 9. But I mean, it's cool with what we've been getting with the sequel trilogy, and I feel like episode 9 is almost going to have I don't know, even though it's like we can think about what kind of direction they'd be going, but I feel like it's almost going to be like a bit of a clean slate in a way, just because, I mean, I'd certainly be hoping there'll be like a bit of a time jump, like 5 years later, and seeing the resistance or the rebellion or whatever they're going to be called now to rebuild, and I'd be interested in knowing how if Poe really steps up, whether he becomes a leader, really steps up so much more with the lessons that he learned through the Last Jedi, and what happened with Rey and just with the whole Jedi sort of thing. So
it's gotta. I know Lucasfilm has like hinted of whether or not they're going to end the Skywalker saga there. I'm pretty sure they're going to. I don't know what that means for the rest of the series if everything has to be contained before the Skywalker saga. I've gotten into some conversation with people online about that, how if they end the Skywalker saga, some people think that they have to balance the Force, and therefore like that's going to change the fabric of the world, and therefore you can't really do any films past that, or you can't do any content past that. I understand that. I don't know if I agree with it. I think it's kind of cool, but I don't know. But that would mean that everything would have to take place prior. So that means that Ben and Rey's story would be the final story of Star Wars in general, which is a lot to do in one film.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, I mean, that's going to be really interesting about, you know, whether Nine's going to be the final sort of Skywalker saga. Because, I mean, the only Skywalker that's left is Ben Solo. And I guess it depends on, you know, what happens with his character, whether, you know, he gets redeemed or whether he, if he dies or he lives and redeems, or dies and redeems, or just dies in general, or, you know, it's, yeah.
Yep.
I think it's on Ben Solo's shoulders, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, in a way of
Absolutely.
yeah.
People kind of forget that sometimes, that you know, the Skywalker saga has always been about the men. I mean, and as a woman, I'm not like angry about that.
Yeah.
Like, it was about Luke, and then it was about Anakin, and now it's about Ben. And although Ben was introduced later on, like, although, you know, Rey's definitely the center of, like, the focus of the story, but she's like Anakin. Like, she was born of the Force. The Force created her for the purpose for Ben. Like, I don't want to get too meta into it, but it's definitely about Ben Solo. Like, that's the story that we're watching, and if he dies, like, that would suck so much. And if they do it well, like, J.J. Abrams is great, so whatever he does, I'll probably be happy with. I like his other stuff, so...
Yeah, me too, yeah. And it is kind of strange, like, with JJ actually coming back, because usually he only does, you know, the first film or, you know, the first episode, and so leaves it up to everyone else,
Yeah.
you know, pick up the pieces. And it's so weird that, yeah, he's sort of coming back to sort of finish up the story of that trilogy. So,
yeah, people joke
yeah.
about, like, how he's never finished anything, and there was a guy on YouTube who, you know, kind of came to the same conclusion I did, which was the only thing that he's finished was Felicity, which is a show about a girl who, like, moves to New York and falls in love and da-da-da. And I haven't actually watched the whole thing. I've watched a little bit, but that was the only thing that JJ's, like, finished. And if that's gonna be the clue to anything, I mean, I think you can look at Lost too, and I think you can say that a lot of the things that happened in Lost were kind of inspired by what JJ would have wanted. So yeah, he's incredibly sentimental. He loves his characters. He loves his love story. He even says, like, in many interviews, that the first thing that he does when he sits down to write something is he identifies a love story. So I am leaning towards, like, full-on happy ending, love story, redemption arc, da-da-da-da. But like I said, if anything goes differently, I'm good either way. But I mean, honestly, though, like, Dark Crystal, the lessons that they're teaching you in that movie, and then if you look at, like, Star Wars 2, like, they're teaching the same lessons, and it's not that if you mess up, you deserve to die.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
And and I mean, like, with the Dark Crystal, it's always about you know, having, you know, sort of the balance between the good and the bad, but ultimately, you know, control, you know, the good.
Yeah.
For the most part. I mean, that's what the Earthskeks were all about, was sort of being able to control the good and bad. And of course, I mean, with the comic in Crash and Miss, when they're trying to come back to their homeworld, and because one of the Earthskeks was, you know, having sort of the dark energy within himself, that has sort of impacted all the other Earthskeks, and because of that happening during the second Great Conjunction, that they split up to the Uru and the Skeksis. So no, which is, like, really cool. And also, I mean, I think you mentioned a video about how the Crystal of Truth is almost, you know, it is kind of like a kyber crystal in a way.
Yeah, no, I was trying to remember what I said too. No, I think because what was cool to me about the crystal was that the Crystal of Truth obviously has power to, like, heal. It has massive power to, like, transport people. It has power to destroy. So that's, to me, that's the kyber crystals, because if you look at, like, Clone Wars and you look at Rebels, the crystals choose the person that will wield them. And like, you know, they call out to them in a very personal way. Like, there's the episode in Clone Wars where all the little kids have to find their crystal, and they all have, like, different tasks that they have to do to get them. And it's like the crystal set them up.
Yeah. I mean, that was such a fantastic episode of Clone Wars.
It's
I
my
really enjoyed
favorite
that
one for sure. I love it. Anytime they have like kids and they're training little Padawans or whatever, I love it. But that is to me, like, again, I don't know if the story group knows exactly what the crystals are, what they do, or whatever. That's not the point. The point is like that they're connected to the people who wield them, and that's kind of the same thing as like what Dark Crystal is doing. Is it is affected by people, and it affects people, or the I guess the whatever beings are interacting with it. Because I was shocked when I went back and I read creation myths. I was like, holy crap, so the crystal was broken after they changed into two separate beings. Like, you think watching the movie that it breaks because, or it breaks and then they separate. That's what you think. But then creation myths is like, oh no, like, they broke it.
It actually sort of, and it sort of damaged Thra. Like, I mean, you know, as the years went on, just Thra got darker and darker. You know, with its like creatures that got darkened, and it just sort of
that was
like a
was bizarre, because again, it's about like the magic system and the rules or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's more so about like the lessons that are being taught and how we're going to teach kids to be good. You know, the Urskeks say that they're going to try to be masters of their own darkness, which is not something you want to teach kids. Like, you don't want to teach them to be you don't want to teach them to try to control the darkness in themselves. You want them to like be aware of it and to choose the better path.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So that's I don't know. It's a whole. When people get too deep into the science of it, I'm like, no, it's not. It's not science fiction. Like, it's fantasy.
Yeah. Like, I mean, with Star Wars, you know, it's a. I know people say it's a space western, but I mean, it's a space opera. You know, it's about family. And I mean, it has aspects of, you know, the space western approach. I can, that, we're well aware of that.
Oh yeah, I kind of take the perspective that it's a space. I take this perspective that it's a fantasy in space, but then it has like elements of space opera and space western for like aesthetic purposes and for, you know, kind of like kind of drawing parallels to remind us of other things. You know, obviously Han Solo is like the Western guy. So that, like, George Lucas was trying to evoke things from the audience by using many different parallels, I think.
Yes, yeah, definitely, yeah. And I'm just trying to think, and I think we'll probably wrap up for this episode. So I just want to say, Ty, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show. And how can listeners find out more about like your videos that you do?
They can find me on YouTube. I'm under Wit and Folly, spelled WIT and FOLLY. You can also find me on Twitter at black_TYM. I love talking about weird anything speculative fiction wise. So feel free to reach out and kind of give me some good video ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Yeah, this was fun. Really enjoyed talking about this. It's definitely a fun subject. So thank you.
You've already taken too long, Gelfling. Hurry!
At last the crystal calls. It is time to return to the castle.
The crystal calls! To the crystal chamber!
Now that's all the time I have for this episode of Trial by Stone. If you'd like to get in contact with the show, you can do so at darkcrystalpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Dark Crystal Podcast. You can check us out on Twitter at Dark Crystal Pod. We're also on Instagram at Dark Crystal Podcast. We also have a Patreon campaign happening with the podcast. You can check that out at patreon.com/Dark Crystal Podcast. And if you can give us a review on Facebook or on iTunes, that'd be greatly appreciated. I hope you all enjoyed the show and come back next time for more Trial by Stone.